We're now live on YouTube, so welcome if you've just joined us. I'm Anna Pritchard. I'm the production designer of Gentleman Jack. Before I introduce my team, I just want to give you a little bit of information about the BFDG, who we are and what we do. The Guild was formed over 70 years ago with the aim of raising the standards and profile of the art department and protecting the interests of its members. Those core principles still apply today, as we are a flourishing and evolving community of over 520 accredited skilled technicians and designers whose talents span the various branches of the art department in film and television. So today we're here to talk about Gentleman Jack and the secret diaries of the art department. So I'm going to introduce you to my team. So firstly, I've got Tom Atkins, who was Supervising art director. His credits are Little Birds, Vanity Fair and The Boys. We've got Ussal Smithers. Her credits are Peaky Blinders, Anthropoid and Hollow Crown. We've got Tabs Dickinson, the standby art director. She did The Great, Fortitude and Born and Bred. We've got Thomas Love, who was a graphic designer with us. And he's done Lethal White, Little Birds and The Miniaturist. And with us today, we've got Gary Brown. Hi, Gary.
Hello.
He's a creative director of Technicolor VFX from London. And finally, our special guest, the multi-award-winning writer and director, Sally Wainwright. Welcome all. Thank you for coming to the forum. I'm going to ask Sally, I'm going to bring her to the foreground. Sally, you've made so many award-winning shows like Happy Valley and Last Tango in Halifax, but what made Gentleman Jack so special for you?
Well, it's my passion project. It's what I wanted to do for, I've been working on this for over 20 years. I started working on this when I was writing At Home with the Braithwaites, which was my first original drama, which came out in the year 2000. So for me, this is what it's all for. This is what my career has been leading up to this. So for me, this was a real exciting project. It was. I just felt so privileged to be able to bring it to the screen and to bring it to the screen with such an extraordinary crew and cast on board. You know, it's been a real.
Been a ride, hasn't it? I mean, like, you know, talking about the diaries, because that's what our biggest inspiration was. I mean, there's 27 volumes, 5 million words. Where did you start? Where did you kind of go, this is the bit that I want to write about?
Well, I read Jill Liddington's book called Female Fortune, and it looked at Anne in the 1830s when she'd inherited Shibden when she was about 40 years old. And so it was Anne when she was kind of at the height of her powers. You know, the earlier part of her life is very interesting, but it's not as complex. So what really appealed to me was the Anne Lister who'd become this, you know, Anne Lister was phenomenally intelligent. She was phenomenally gifted. She was very physically fit. I always say she had the body of an Olympic athlete and the mind of a Nobel Prize winning laureate. She was a phenomenal human being. And so when she'd inherited Shibden and she was just spinning so many plates, she was in season 2, which I'm writing at the moment, she becomes a property developer. And, you know, nothing stops her, nothing stands in her way. There's no end to her ambition. So I wanted to come to the story when she's this mature woman who's got, you know, increasingly complex and got so much about her.
I know, it's you know, she was this kind of, you know, real buccaneering woman. You know, as I said to you many times before, it's like when I read your scripts, that's the first thing I thought of, you know, was this kind of pioneer, you know, striding across West Yorkshire. You know, she was kind of like, what the people that came to mind were like Annie Oakley and Calamity Jane, and she was this sort of real Wild West character.
Yeah.
And you know,
well, we
wanted to make the Wild West of Yorkshire. You know, that's what we wanted to turn it into.
Yeah, yeah.
But so did you have I remember you said somewhere that you broke a bit of the code yourself, didn't you? You kind of...
The code was broken in 1895 by one of our
Oh, yes, yeah.
The son of the guy who inherited, the lister who inherited Shibden after Anne died. But it's the diaries have been hidden away and rediscovered and hidden away and rediscovered. But I didn't know you could get hold of a copy of the code, so I actually found a little section in one of Jill Liddington's books called Presenting the Past, where there was the code and Jill had written next to it what it meant. So I worked out letter by letter what the code was from this one extract. So I taught myself the code, which actually meant it sank in. So I learned it quite quickly, and I was obsessed as well. So
I know. I mean, that's quite impressive. I mean, it's so impressive to me, you know. But I mean, like, did you have like a eureka moment when you kind of learned that you could actually read it? And
yeah, because it's not that complex. It's what's called a simple substitution cipher. So there's an obvious there's a symbol for each letter. It isn't like it isn't like a rolling code where it changes each time. It's actually very, once you get the hang of it, it's actually pretty straightforward. So I use it all the time. I write in code all the time.
Oh my God, I know. You sent me a birthday card in code. It took me quite a while. It was lovely. And so the other question I wanted to ask you, Sally, is the diaries contain, you know, so many sort of diagrams and sketches and visual sort of description, but did it kind of like inform your vision whilst you were writing the scripts?
Not hugely, because I've not come across that many. I wish she'd drawn more, actually. She just did the odd little cartoon here and there, which she wasn't really an artist. You know, there's a picture of a horse and it looks a bit like a goat. She's drawing it because she was actually drawing the carriage. I think it was when she was in Russia and she was interested in this carriage. So, but there are some quite interesting little architectural drawings and various bits throughout. And she often draws diagrams of mines and things like that, things that interest her.
Yeah, I mean, we actually got a lot of information from those diaries. You know, we really did, didn't we? I mean, and I'll bring Thomas in now to talk about the diaries, because you know, I think, you know, throughout the whole show, when we didn't realise what, you know, we were doing, we would often, you know, I would often call, you know, either yourself or Anchoma or kind of Thomas to try and work out, you know, what did she have in the diary? How can you help us, you know, figure out what we were actually trying to build? And a lot of those answers were in the diaries, you know, weren't they? You know, when we couldn't actually, you know, like when we wanted to find out about the Showmere, we didn't know anything about it, but it was all in the diaries, so we could always go back, and then kind of work out what we were actually meant to be, you know, building.
Description of something like the Showmere, because she's obsessed with it. It's a real passion project for her to build this. And I mean, she even describes the plants that she puts around the Showmere and that sort of thing.
I know, it's incredible. So, you know, I'm going to just probably talk about the look of Gentleman Jack. I've already said that it was, you know, I wanted to create this wild west of Yorkshire, but really I kind of wanted to bring quite lots of colour into the project, because, you know, it's a lively piece, and even though, you know, there's sort of melancholy moments, it's full of life and vigour and a lot of humour. And, you know, I like your work because it's very humorous. And so yeah, pushing forward the colour for me was a big thing. And my main influence was the work of Atkinson Grimshaw, who was a Leeds-based painter, and he painted quite a lot of, you know, Yorkshire landscapes, very atmospheric, and it just suited the piece for me anyway. Sally, so I was just going to ask you, but Gentleman Jack is quite different to a lot of the sort of cosy Sunday night period dramas that we're used to watching, and it's kind of very modern in a way. There's a lots of sort of breaking the fourth wall, but was that your intention all along to kind of, you know?
Yeah, it's not an adaptation of a novel. It's you know, it's a living document in terms of it records in such tiny detail every beat of a life. You know, it is a unique document in many ways, very many ways, but that in particular, I don't think there is any other diary that is quite so detailed in the minutiae of everyday life. And so you know, that's why I wanted to speak to camera. There were many reasons for that as well. One is that it represents the diary. When you read the diary, you personally read the diary, just feel like she's speaking to you. It feels like you've got a hotline to Anne Lister. And so for her to speak to camera, it was a version of how it feels when you read the diary. It really does look like she's looking you in the face and speaking straight to you. So that I felt was a very appropriate way to, and it's a lovely conceit, you know, the fact that cameras just didn't exist in 1832. So I you know, it made me laugh, just the fact that she could speak a thing that didn't exist then. So I hope that gave it a kind of cheek and
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thomas, I'm going to bring you forward now, because you're you made us 14 diaries, didn't you? Yeah. And it was challenging because we needed them to be incredibly authentic. So can you tell me a little bit how you approached remaking all of these?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think from the start, one of our very first conversations was about making the diaries as true to the Anne's originals as possible. And that started with a trip to the West Yorkshire Archives over in Wakefield to go see the actual diaries and where they were being conserved, because they were doing structural work to make sure they were repaired and future generations can still look at them. So I went over to the archives with a notebook and pencil, and then took every possible picture, measurement, colour sample, to try and collect as much information about the diaries as possible. But definitely after reading the scripts and then actually handling the diaries, you get the sense of the historical weight they have. I mean, on some pages you can see tear marks if Anne was writing a kind of particularly traumatic passage. So it's kind of collecting as much information as possible from the originals, and then finding really good craftspeople like Gemma Lewis, for example, did all of our beautiful marbled papers, all colour matched to the originals, and the incredible Kari at Wyvern Bindery hand bound them with hand stitched signatures in exactly the same way that Anne would have had them made when she had them made by the bookseller in Halifax at the time.
Yeah, amazing.
And even in terms of internal pages, all text that you see on screen there, that is Anne's handwriting. We haven't copied that. Colesdale Museums had just finished a project to have them more digitised. And members of the public can go online now and they can actually browse her diaries online, but they very kindly gave us access to those scans, and we cleaned them up and reprinted them. So the diary that Saran uses in the show is a kind of as close a facsimile as it's possible to get to the real deal.
Brilliant. So Tabs,
yeah,
I mean, can you kind of explain your collaboration with the actors on set?
Yeah,
so you went about kind of, teaching them how to use quills and nibs and...
Yeah. So obviously these diaries are the main prop of the show and also quite valuable. And there were quite a few scenes with Saran writing in her diary. So, and it's not as simple as just writing in a contemporary drama of just having a biro and writing. You have to explain to the actor. Most of them aren't used to using these sort of 18th century, 1800s sort of things like quills and pots of ink and pounce for drying out the ink. And we had this precious prop and an actor trying to write with a quill, and so you have to sort of vaguely send them away with a pack in advance to practice these things, and then hope that on the day it's going to work all right. So obviously she had to write in the diary, and for wide shots you don't need to see close-ups of the writing, so it's fine. And if Sally, for example, wanted a close-up, we got sort of hand doubles in to try and match the writing really as near as possible. So yes, we have to. We can't actually have the actor writing on a main bit of paper of the diary. So we would have copies and copies of the page, and we would have to be sticking them in very delicately. The actor writing, and then we would have to go for another take, tear it out carefully, stick another one in. So the whole process of writing in the diaries was quite yeah, it was quite elongated really, but yeah, I think it worked well. So
So back to Sally again. I'm going to ask you. Oh, Thomas.
Sorry, no, that was me writing as well.
Thomas, show us what you're doing there.
That's me. That's me pretending to be Captain Sutherland writing, because yeah, we needed someone. We did an extreme close up on the pen nib. So yeah, that was.
You had the sleeves on as well.
Donning the sleeves and the rings, perched on
and the rings.
on an apple crate, and they push a camera over your shoulder. You got to try and remember the line and kind of read the line in your head as you're writing. So that's my 5 seconds of fame.
Well, you did a good job. You did a grand job.
Done.
Shibden. Sally, I wanted to ask you about, you know, a lot of the historical houses, because it was very important for you, wasn't it, to try and use the houses that actually belong to the real characters of the show.
I was very
Shibden, as we know, is Anne's ancestral home.
Yeah.
And were there others? I'm sure you remember all of them.
Well, there was, I mean, Crowsnest doesn't exist anymore, so we found, you found Sutton House, was it called? Sutton Hall?
Yeah.
Which was, I suppose, the nearest equivalent, wasn't it? But we talked a lot about the contrast, didn't we, between Shibden and Crowsnest.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, I think, you know, well, if we talk about Shibden, it was, you know, it is a kind of, it's a Tudor manor house, and it's very dark inside. It's absolutely magnificent, but you know, it comes with a, you know, there's a darkness about it, let's put it that way. But Crowsnest, on the other hand, you know, we wanted it to be the opposite. We wanted it to be feminine and light and airy. But you know, going back to Shibden, you know, it's fantastic and it's wonderful, but it did have its limitations to what we could actually film in. It's very, very small upstairs. So we ended up having to build of the house. And Tom, I'm going to bring you in at this point and just say, do you want to explain what we did and how we made it, you know, how we turned this museum into Anne's real life living ancestral home?
So for the actual location, which was obviously the exterior and the ground floor, a big thing we needed to change for the exterior look was to remove Anne's stamp that she put on the place before, you know, she did that when it was more farmland and rural, to which became her grand scheme of it being more parkland, which it is now. So for a good 4 to 6 months, we let the land overgrow. We added you know, hedgerows back in, which was part of the storyline in action that cast for removing part of the hedgerows. We added the cow pens back in, a lot more kind of with the sheep's cattle kind of grazing the land and stuff like that. And then in terms of the interior, if you go to Shibden now, it's obviously predominantly downstairs Georgian panelling, but a lot of the Georgian panelling wasn't there quite so much before Anne Lister put her mark on it again. And if you peel back a part of the Georgian panelling, which is hinged if you ever go and visit, there's an area that's got the original kind of Tudor beams and render work on it. And if you look closely, there's all these kind of designs and drawings of this kind of witch and pagan design that was on there that we brought through up into her bedroom build upstairs that you'll notice was on beam work. And we also added that to the back of the door because it was kind of like this, we looked into it and it was like an idea of protection that was on the back of her bedroom door and things like that. So that's kind of the things that we did.
To ward off evil spirits, wasn't it? That's what we think it is anyway. We're not 100%, but we think it was, you know, something to ward off evil spirits, which we thought was great for Anne.
Yeah, sure. I mean, before I talk about the builds that were the upstairs, do you want to talk septec wise about what we did?
Yeah, so let's kind of, you know, it was dark, wasn't it? Lovely Shibden. So we had to kind of, you know, vamp it up a little bit. And I wanted to bring colour into it. So how do we attack that?
Well, we wanted to make it look like it's lived in. It was a bit more like a museum when we obviously went in there. So we want to bring in the furniture of period is quite also really dark wood. So by bringing, you know, upholstered little bits of furniture here and there, and curtains, and you know, maybe a bit more trimming, colourful trimming, so on, to give it a bit more life. But we kept it the dignity of the house with this sort of well-worn and lived in and stuck to the earthly tones. Kept the kitchen areas and the scullery and all of that very busy with you know, working kitchen. That was
yeah. We had to kind of like, I mean, we kind of dressed that out, you know, with loads of, you know, rabbits and stews and, you know, bits we dug up from the garden.
Loads of herbs everywhere.
And then we, you know, and then, you know, we kind of like, and then we get to her study, and this is where it was getting exciting, because all of these are builds, aren't they, Tom? You know, we built all of the top floor.
So, which you'll see the pictures of now, studying her bedroom and the hallway, all of that. We decided to build this in the studio, and there was obviously a number of factors, one of them being the size of Shibden rooms upstairs are so small, which is obviously the look that we still wanted to keep but make it filmable. And there's a lot of intimate scenes that was all around Anne's bed, and we wanted to get more dynamic shots above, around and behind Anne's bed for that, rather than, you know, similar shots throughout. And then one of the big things that we did, which you could never do in a location, there was a scene where Anne Walker was in Udale having a moment looking into a mirror, and then a scene where Anne Lister at the same time was looking into her mirror in her bedroom. And we did an intercut of where we panned around the back of Anne Walker. There was a VisFX element where you didn't see the camera in the mirror, and then we panned through what was the set wall that we set, you know, we struck out and came into then what was Anne Lister's bedroom, and dynamic shots like that just obviously weren't possible without it being a build.
Yeah, without being able to take walls out and, you know, get the camera in. I think we're hovering on this picture, aren't we? Because Ussal, I want you to tell me all about this wonderful table with the breasts.
Well, this was our last day, I think, in our buying trip. We because she's such a fantastic, you know, she's so ahead of her time. We went, and we almost went to Europe, UK, everywhere, bought all the curiosities, the things that she was really interested to. And Anna and I, the last day, we found this Renaissance table, and we just were like, oh wow, Anne would love this. And brought it to our set. You know, lots of other things. And she was the barometers, the clocks, and they're all, you know, not just from England, they're from all around the place. Like, she would have felt interested in medical
all the specimen jars
objects.
With all the specimen jars with, you know, twins' heads, Siamese twins' heads in them. You got all of those.
Yeah, whatever you can imagine. Yeah, all her objects. And there was a lot of discussion about, she was carrying this barometer with her, and our buyer, Robin Richardson and Amanda, they put so much effort. We tried to find a barometer she can carry herself everywhere that was proper for the period. I remember when we actually found it, there was big screams. We were so happy to bring it all together.
It was difficult finding those props, wasn't it? It's so difficult to find Georgian props, you know, action props. It is. I mean, digging around to find, you know, that's why we had to go to Europe. You know, well, we don't always have to go to Europe to find that, but it's it can be sort of troublesome sometimes.
Yeah.
So Tabs.
Yes.
We're on. Do you want to talk about dogs? I think that's probably the best question I've asked you.
Well, Well, yes, here you can see this was a lovely Irish deerhound called Rodri, who played Argus, which was Anne Lister's dog. And as you can see, he's huge. I mean, he may not look so big there, but actually he was the size of a light Shetland pony. And basically it was a really hot summer with the fires going, all the crew in, and he was made to lay down, you know, to add this extra dimension to family life around the fire. And it was nice because you could see animals and they kind of do their own thing. So it was quite nice to have this dimension there. But he was quite difficult to maneuver because of the size of him. So he was like, once he was in place, you know, you would be sitting all over the actor's feet and you basically no one else could move or step over him. So he had to be put in last. And he would take his time settling down, and eventually he would settle down with his bum towards camera, which obviously doesn't look great. So then you'd have to call in the animal handler and sort of rearrange him again, which took its time. But it was quite nice. There were quite a few animals throughout the show that were related to certain actors and things, and it was quite nice having the extra dimension of real life.
It brings it alive, doesn't it? It brings it alive.
Or VFX animals, canary, which Gary. Just because they don't make as much noise, obviously. So a lot of VFX animals involved as well. So yeah, but.
Right, I think we better move on to talk about Crowsnest. Sally, you mentioned before that. So the nice part of it was we could actually interpret what Anne Walker's house would have looked like. It's new money. She was sort of in manufacturing, so it would have been, you know, the biggest thing, the latest fashion of the day. So very, very traditionally Georgian. And we found this wonderful house in Sutton House in York. And actually, we wanted the contrast, more of a feminine look for her. And even though this house was perfect in lots of ways, it was very dark and a little bit very gloomy. So we really had to lighten it up. I asked Ussal to kind of punch it with sunlight, punch the sunlight through. And so we decided on canary yellows. That was the colour that we wanted to kind of go for. So Ussal, do you want to talk about, all the wonderful furniture that you got and, how you pulled it all together?
Yeah, I think this was a standing set. I can't remember now how many times we dressed this, but I think about 3 times we went in there. So it was logical to buy as much as possible, and I think I was very lucky to find the 14 furniture to buy, and we were upholstered it to this beautiful yellow and spread it throughout the whole room. And the next room we continued with sort of vivid pastels into her bedroom and to dining room as well, and played around these colors, and I think that brought the brightness in, and the gilt furniture. It's
the wonderful Italian mirrors that you bought. The wonderful Italian
yes
mirrors.
They are they're hired, actually, those. Yes, we brought them hoping that for them to reflect and give a bit more light. But if we did put these big floral arrangements in front of.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so moving on then. So we wanted to talk about Halifax. Now, this was a huge set for us, and it was how we approached this. I went into the Halifax archives. We found quite a lot of old lithographs of what Halifax looked like at the time, and it was predominantly timber Tudor buildings. Although it's sort of like there was more and more building going on, so the new builds were coming along. But obviously, to do this now, it was really, really troublesome. We wanted to make it in Yorkshire, and we ended up finding a cobble street in Bradford, didn't we, Tom? So do you want to kind of talk about how we kind of brought this together? Because it was, it was a bit of a feat, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we found this street in Bradford that was great. It had the full length of cobble street. It had some, newer Georgian buildings that we could work with rather than have to clad the whole facades. So we could add in more of our Tudor stuff that we wanted. So I think the first thing we did was we stood there, we mapped out all the action, where we wanted everything to play out, from certain hero shots to where the high flyer would come from. And kind of designed it around that, really, once we knew the logistics of where people were going. One of the opening main scenes is obviously where Anne comes flying around on the high fly around the corner up through the whole extent of the streets, which kind of establishes the Wild West of Halifax. So a lot of it was kind of designed around that, really. And then, as you can see, we built up to 12, 14 in different areas foot for a VFX cut-off line, because we knew that we're always going to have set extensions.
I think at this point I should say, Gary, this was like a really big kind of art department and VFX collaboration doing this street, wasn't it? So
absolutely. Yeah.
There was a lot of us and then a lot of you, wasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, as ever on shows like this, you and I would be constantly talking about where to draw the line, how much you would do, how much we would do, and that sort of line is very much about where's the best use of money, the best use of, the most efficient use of money, and also combined with that would give the camera pretty much scope to point in most directions, and you get most of the action and little bits of VFX here and there. And then every now and then, like in that big set piece at the beginning of when she comes around the corner, we'd fill in that second floor that you were just seeing there and the end of the street. That was quite a big build. The camera was very wild that day. It was that particular camera that we're looking at there was mounted on the end of a crane, which was on top of a race-tuned Mercedes. Then we're just screaming behind that carriage. I remember sitting next to you, Sally, thinking this is the wildest experience I think I've ever had, with a camera just inches away from these actors, getting the most dynamic shots possible. And so the camera's just flying around. That meant that whole street had to be built in 3D. So we went in there and did something called a LiDAR scan, which is essentially a camera which uses lasers, like some sort of a radar device that just scans the whole street, builds a CGI version of that street in high detail in a computer, and then we photograph all the buildings, put that onto this model, and you've essentially got the whole model of that street in a computer. And then we go in and build the Tudor versions of the houses and sort of say, let's have a couple here, let's have one down the end. As you pointed out, there's an awful lot of Georgian construction going on at the time, so it was really nice for this street to have a little bit of both. Keep some of the Georgian buildings that were there, perhaps change some of the windows, definitely change some of the windows so that they were original, and sprinkle them with these lovely Tudor buildings. This particular shot here, if you wouldn't mind just going back there, Tom, if you go back and have a little look at what we shot. I mean, there's no green screen or anything up there. So there were shots where we were looking straight up, well past your set, thinking, well, we just simply have to cut those people out. And even, that whip had to be cut out by hand. And if you just go back to what we did, Thomas, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's blended in quite nicely. But quite pleased with how that turned out in the end.
But no, that was a great collaboration, because we talked a lot about Tudor buildings. We talked a lot in depth. We did sketches. We did a lot of stuff, and we worked for weeks on that. And I'm sure you worked for months on that as well, Gary.
Yeah, but your art department walls were the initial inspiration. I mean, you'd already spent a couple of months doing all the research. So for me, to read the script and think, oh, well, I wonder what that looks like, and then to walk into your room and go, oh, that's what it looks like. That was brilliant.
Yes. Yeah.
Invaluable.
Great. So, Thomas, do you want to talk to us all about your wonderful signs?
Yes, the shop signs were a big thing, because we built kind of quite a length of street across a crossroads. So like anything, the scripts were our first port of call. And then for the other shops that you don't necessarily mention in scripts, we obviously still as an art department have to build. We then go back to our source material, which for us was the Anne's Diaries. So pull up our several hundred-page transcription that scripts very kindly lent us, and have a search. And this was an example of one of them, signs we made that was inspired straight from the diaries. There's a little passage where Anne talks about taking shelter in the rain opposite the Lister Apothecary. We thought, oh, I'm sure that must be a coincidence. Then I spoke to Anne Schomer and did some research. It turns out the apothecary in Halifax was founded by Anne's grandfather. So as such, you can see there's a tiny little Lister crest painted at the top of the apothecary sign. I think, yeah, all down the street, if she mentioned that she went to Low the Tailors, then we made sure that our tailors kind of matched. Obviously, we can't know what their signs look like, but it was at least inspired by directly the words straight from our diary.
Fantastic. So what have we got next? So we could talk about mines now, because mining was, quite a big thing in Anne Lister's life. She wanted to know all about it. So she did lots of research. She went down mines. She did all sorts. So it ended up that we had to create 3 different mines, and that meant vertical mine shaft, horizontal mine shafts. We know so much about it now, but when we started this job, we knew nothing about it. And I was going to ask Sally, how much did you know about all this 19th century mine when you started writing it?
Very little. I mean, I'd read a few articles related to Anne's business in mining, but predominantly from the journals. And you just learn more and more as you go along. I've just learned a load more for season 2, and it's quite frustrating because she tells you so much and not quite enough, because she knows so much already.
Yeah.
I'm sure you found the same thing when you were designing things, that you get quite a clear picture, but you want to know a bit more, and she just doesn't tell you. So but if you read on, she often tells you what you need to know, but it's finding time to read read enough to get a really clear picture of what she's on about.
Absolutely.
But that set, I didn't actually see that set in the flesh. That was in the episodes that Sarah directed, but it looked fantastic. I remember George Costigan sending me a photograph of himself in the set because he was so thrilled by this fantastic set that you'd built.
It was a great location, though. We were, we lucked out, I think, finding this location. I think the shot they did was like a big drone or over the top of it, and we to be honest, I spent a long time with Luke, the location, sort of stomping around all the old, looking at ordnance survey maps and working out where all the best, the best scenes were going to be. So we did a lot of groundwork, in a few weeks, but it was fun. It was fun. So Tom, do you want to talk to us about all the mines that we did and how we put them all together?
So yeah, as you said, we had 3 exteriors and an interior. I think we thought the best thing for us to do was to get ourselves down a coal mine.
Yes.
So up until the 80s, it was still working, was the Wakefield coal mine. And thankfully it still has areas that have been restored from very early on Georgian mining. So we looked out really there. So we had a trip down there, looked around it all, which was great for visual referencing and the logistics of how all the mine worked, from sinking the shaft through to where they would go into the coal face, taking it out and propping up the ceiling, which you'll see that we were toying with the idea of potentially filming, because they do film down that mine and they'd even have weddings down there. But not, they have weddings.
Well, there's hope for me yet then.
Yeah, but talking logistics about, the fact it would have been dripping with water, it had been hazy and smoggy from natural gases escaping from the coal, and then talking about the crew numbers down there, the access, we realised that it wasn't feasible with what we wanted to achieve, so we decided to build it in the studio. And then by building it in the studio, we had the option to take a cross section of the mine away and do this great shot of where in the diary Anne comes down into the pit on a corve, basket on a skate. So this is kind of what she did. She came into this shaft like that. So we got to kind of build it all at these true proportions, you know, which are kind of these unsafe heights. There's all bits hanging and cantilevered, and you kind of got the real feel of the danger and the, you know, of the what was then was prior to the pit ponies, and it was children mining down there. So we got to do that for the
dark. Children in the dark, weren't they? They kind of poor things, you know what they went through.
All lit by oil light. And then you'll see on the next slide, Thomas, we also built this horse gin gig, what they used to bring the coal back out of. So we built this up on the top. Obviously, all of the locations were on the top of hills, being very exposed. This was towards the end of what was an incredible summer that we had filming. And it was in October, and I remember we put it up on a Friday evening. I was actually camping in my camper van that weekend nearby, and we had this freak storm that hit, rocking my camper van, thinking, oh my God, I know that horse gin gig that we built up there. Anyway, lo and behold, Monday morning when we all went up there, it was halfway down the hill. So, you know, thankfully we got it up in the next 2 days before filming, and there it was to film. But, you know, we had that to deal with as well.
So Tabs, this was, can you explain what's going on here?
So this is the horse that's been driving the gin gig round, and obviously they're very short of money and quite tight for money, and their horses has died and collapsed, unfortunately. So we were shooting this with a big discussion over the horse, and Sally, the director, wanted flies around the horse, and so I had a box this in the morning of props, and it was very light, and I was like, well, what's in this box then? And someone said, oh, it's got about 20,000 flies in there. so all these flies were bagged up in hundreds different, you know, and so just before turnover I had to place these bags of flies sort of tucked under the horse, and cut them open and sprinkled all this sugar and sweet stuff and these horrible meaty rags and things that flies would be attracted to, and turn over, and you have to release the flies. And obviously flies kind of do their own thing, they're not trained, so like I think about 95% of them just escaped into thin air, and 5 of them hovered around, and they looked good, and I thought they looked good, and then once again it turns out to be visual effects once again. So I had this really
shelf
awful
of flies on, and I bring them out every now and then.
Yeah, so this grim job was it all turned out to be visual effects again. So but it was a story to tell, because it was probably the grimmest job I've ever done in my 25 years. Yeah.
Right, we better talk about, now we're on to the ports. So not only did we have coal mines, we had 3 ports to create as well. This one we were meant to be filming in Denmark, but we lost a lot of locations. We ended up filming this one in Liverpool, and again, this was a good collaboration between Gary and ourselves. So Tom, I'm going to ask you and Gary, just to sort of talk about how we put this one together.
So what you see in front of us was Copenhagen, which was when Anne arrived at Copenhagen and her carriage was being taken off the ship in lashing rain. Unlike some of the other ports, which were big, wider vistas, this one was a bit more contained, and hence why we chose this location, where we built the side of a dock with the gangplank that you can see, with a threshold that we built, the physical threshold, with the design of the side of the ship that gave a visual effects cut-off point for the cast to be coming through and down the plank. Here, obviously, we've been on the side of the Mersey. We can only build to a certain height, a certain dimension, because we knew we were going to have wind and rain against us. So that's what we built there. And then you'll see kind of on the next shot that we also did envision Anne Lister's carriage being taken off. So we have had to weigh the carriage, work out the logistics of the potential of it spinning in the wind, where it was, what the kind of the ground was at by the side of Mersey Dock to make sure it could take the equipment that we wanted. And we found this particular Manitou that we knew that could do it. We clad it in a kind of a timber arm, so we managed to do physically Anne's carriage coming off of the ship and being lowered onto the dock side with all the hustle and bustle of everything else, which I thought kind of added to it all. And then you'll see kind of in the next slide, which Gary will talk about in a moment, that this is the kind of a ship that we took up in Hartlepool that we used for other locations. So from what was the VisFX green screen that we used, on the next slide, Gary can talk about how he turned what we built, which you saw earlier, into which was the finished image. If you want to talk about that, Gary.
Sure. So we did a couple of recce's there, just casing out what we were going to do. I think at one point, Anna, you were talking about building a substantial side of that boat.
Yes.
And I was just saying that I think all we really need is something for the people to step out of. They need to be stepping out of the darkness and then into the light. But unlike what we saw over at Cater Street, where the camera was wild, moving around and therefore required 3D, here the camera wasn't really doing anything terribly wild. It was just doing a gentle push in, which means that there wasn't really any need for it to do 3D. So since this boat existed, we thought, okay, well, actually, all we need is exactly the same angle as we're filming the main action. And as long as we do that, the composite should be able to go together quite well. And I think there are about 4 angles. So we just made sure when we went to Hartlepool that we shot the boat in the same angles that we shot all the actors here. And with a little bit of moving things around, we're able to put it together. And then down the end, just getting rid of the green screen and finding some old sort of Danish looking warehouses, the big tall ones with the huge roofs and tiles, and that sort of falls away into the distance. But the other thing was, it was supposed to be, as you say, lashing down and just rain. So we had a rain machine going the whole time with wind. And so that really was quite a wet day there. And we just balanced out the rain at the same time. Do you have the video of that, Thomas?
Yeah, I'll put that.
So yeah, and here's a little bit of before and after. So yeah, the top shots, and there's the final composite. So shots like that, they're not terribly expensive to put off because they weren't 3D. That's actually relatively simple in terms of compositing, doing it that way. But I think it worked all right.
It looks great. It looked amazing. So So we went to Denmark, and this was one of the highlights for me. Filming in Copenhagen. It was very exciting. My main influence for the Danish sort of stint that we did was the works of Hammershøi, and for people that know it, he sort of like creates really beautiful grey tones, we had some fantastic locations in Denmark, some which fell through at the last minute, but some that were real corkers. They're really, really beautiful sets. And Ussal, you really pulled a lot of this stuff together under kind of tough circumstances, because it was really difficult to find, period Danish furniture without prop stalls, wasn't it? So you had quite a lot of work to do to try and find these pieces.
All the throne room, we brought all that from UK, which I have to say here that we are one of the countries that we're very, very lucky with our industry here, with our pop store and all of that. This is just not possible in a lot of the other countries. So all the throne room came from UK, but we had some domestic interiors. It was quite exciting to go and chase these antique dealers in Copenhagen and bring this really lovely Gustavian Danish furniture to keep, and suddenly it made sense. It really didn't look like stuff that we brought from England or French. It felt very much so off its place.
It felt very authentic and very different to a lot of the sets that we created. I was really pleased with how that was pulled together.
Colour palette, beautiful though, isn't it? Look at that.
Well, it looks like a painting, doesn't it?
And I put this Anna put the Hammershøi in my head, and I was obsessed with
he's called it.
Yeah, and finally actually put it on our project is just really pleasing.
But I've got to say, Matt Gray, DOP, and Tom Pye as well, both did amazing, and they kind of really pulled all the tones together. So, I mean, I haven't really mentioned this before, but I worked so closely with both Matt and Tom, and just like such lovely people, and we talked, almost obsessively about colours and tones and light, and it was a real sort of good combination of technicians, I'd hope to say. But yeah, it was good fun.
I think the choice of lenses that Matt was using, the anamorphic lenses, and what that actually does to the image. It sort of has this sort of vignette. You get this as the image just peels away to the edges. It just has this incredible texture to it, which you just don't see in sort of normal film cameras. So.
Absolutely. So should we have a look at the other sets? So that was we had to build a throne for the Danish Queen. This is our throne room, and like Ussal said, it was we had to bring a lot of props from the UK for this one. But then the food. So we had De Hageman's. I hope it was De Hageman's dinner party when she first arrived in Denmark. And Ussal, you found the most amazing, didn't you, with all the historical contents of what we should be eating, and you pulled it all together.
Yeah, we did, and we were very lucky with the economist in Denmark. It all came really beautifully, but my excitement was actually the crockery, because this is so bang on of Danish. It was what the royal families they used, and it's quite difficult to find the pieces. We've done a product placement with Royal Copenhagen, and this is for Danica, but we couldn't get enough pieces. We had lots of cost around this table, and the rest of it was found from antique dealers in Copenhagen. I think like there was only 4 people were allowed to touch the plates. Yes. They had to wear gloves, and there were quite a lot of detail involved, but we got there at the end.
Yeah, it was last minute, wasn't it? Lastminute.com that arrived. Do you remember?
Yeah. And there was a lot of it going to show up.
Absolutely. So yes, and again, the final piece was her going to the ball, and arrived at the ball, and we had to do this in Liverpool. And I'm going to ask Ussal and Thomas, you can tell us how we actually made, a big town hall in Liverpool look like the Danish Queen's
very quickly
in one day. One day.
With lots of will and lots of amazing people, amazing dressing crew, working like very systematically in a very dedicated way, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this was right at the end, wasn't it? And it was kind of all hands to the deck to get it done. Yeah.
What are those paintings though, Thomas? How did you? Because we had to put.
Yeah, so they had these massive original paintings in Liverpool Town Hall, but they were behind glass. But they were obviously wrong, and I mean, even the style of them was so English. We wanted to heighten it to something much more Danish and much more royal. So we found and licensed these images that were digital scans of paintings from the royal collection in Denmark. And then digitally printed them onto like a very thin foam board, like only about 2 millimeters thin. So there were these giant prints from a large format printer in Leeds that did it for us. And then the glass on the originals was protected with some masking tape. And then our big fake paintings were then mounted over the top. And it was, like myself, Lydia, our art department assistant, Rasheen, spent days before overpainting these prints with like a textured medium, so they had the real texture of oil paintings, didn't fall flat. And then by the time you mount them in these beautiful big frames and add them in with all the stunning flowers and set dressing.
Yeah, Kim Queen, she was amazing. I actually have a photo of her with one of her giant floral arrangements, and she looks tiny next to it. We always laugh about that, and they come out. We were very excited about it, weren't we, Anna, with all this feathers and the colours.
Pineapples in there, weren't there? They're like whole pineapples sticking out, and
absolute gold.
Yeah, gold pineapples.
I'm going to go back to Sally. Sally, I didn't ask you, and I want to ask you, because going back to Copenhagen, what did you enjoy about filming abroad? It was really different, wasn't it?
It was just very exciting. I think it was it added such a fantastic element to the show at that point in episode 8. To just feel you're in a completely different environment. I mean, that beautiful shot that you just showed of Saran sitting in the chair in that room in that fantastic house, it just looks so different from everything else. It just felt so different to the texture of everything else we'd shot back in England. And the fantastic shot we did in the street where she arrived at the Hagemans before the dinner party, it just, it really felt like we had gone abroad, which we had, and it just felt very special to me that we were able to do that. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think we've pretty much concluded what we were trying to fit in today. There we all are, the art department, because there's plenty of people that aren't here that we need to mention. Richard Downs, I could go on, but you know who you are, and we had such a big but wonderful team, put a lot of effort into it.
Tabs, that your pig?
Yeah,
Tabs,
that's my pig.
Tabs, do you want to talk about the pig?
Have I got time to talk about the pig?
You've got time to talk about the pig if you wish.
This was a fake pig that they needed to slash the throat of and have all blood. So you can maybe see there's a sort of wire that's going into the window that was our blood feed. So basically, we had to have that out of shot and slice the neck, and then this big torrent of blood came out. So, but a lot of people thought it was real, but there were actually real dead pigs inside that door there, which were quite horrendous. But there you go. So now, you'd think I was the animal wrangler on this program. I'm not.
I have to say that we got them from the butchers. We didn't do anything naughty.
Yeah, we didn't kill them.
Okay. So, right, I just have to say now that we've actually got some questions. Oh, no, that's the end. That was the final plate. And I think that's a wonderful photo of Saran and Sally. And it just, there was a lot of hard work, wasn't there? 200 sets we did. 200 sets on Gentleman Jack, and I think at the end of it we were pretty exhausted. There's an awful lot that we haven't talked about, but we just don't really have time to go into,
It was really extraordinary achievement, I think, kind of what you pulled off in your department. You asked me what my favourite set was, and I just couldn't say, because it was all so amazing. It was, the logistics, the artistry, it was just stunning work.
Thank you. Well,
I mean, as an infiltrator coming from BFDG,
very nice.
I just think the detail is fantastic. Just hearing the detail that you guys have put into the show, phenomenal.
But it's exciting. It's why we do it, Gary. Because we love it. We're all slightly, we're very passionate about what we do, and we really care. And that's all I'm going to say, because we're the art department.
Yay.
So I suppose I've got to try and wind this all up now. I don't know if it's all but there's quite a few. Someone has written in to us, James O'Shea, who's a storyboard artist and illustrator. And Sally, I've got a question from him to you, which is, our heroes, Anne and Anne, are framed by the landscape. Were those shots used as a metaphor?
And they weren't really a metaphor. The reason I wanted to show the landscape was, well, there were many reasons, but the big one was to express very clearly and visually that they were both very powerful, rich women who owned a lot of land, and that land was a big part of their marriage. You know, they became a power couple, and it was all because of the land. It wasn't a metaphor. The only metaphor I think I was conscious of using was the bird in the cage, the little canary. It was meant to represent Anne Walker being trapped in her gilded cage at Crowsnest.
Absolutely. I knew the canary would get in somewhere. I suppose, I think we're sort of wrapping things up. And I wanted to say thank you to the whole of our panel here. And I wanted to say thank you to the BFDG for giving us this platform to talk about our work, because, like we already said, we're very passionate about what we do. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to say it's a goodbye from me and a goodbye from
them.
everyone.